What if I told you that behind the polished image of Hollywood's toughest action star and one of the world's most beautiful supermodels, there's a relationship hanging by a thread that nobody's talking about? The whispers have started. Industry insiders are noticing things. And if you look closely at the breadcrumbs they've been leaving on social media, the timeline of their public appearances, and the shocking revelations from people close to them, you'll see what everyone's been too afraid to say out loud. Jason Statham and Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, the couple everyone thought was unbreakable, might be heading toward a split that could shock the entertainment world. I'm not saying it's confirmed, but when you connect the dots between his past relationship patterns, the recent rumors swirling around their 15-year relationship, and some very suspicious behavior that's been caught on camera, you start to see a picture that doesn't look as perfect as their Instagram posts suggest. Before we dive into what's really happening right now, let me paint you a picture of why this relationship was always walking on shaky ground. Jason Statham isn't just any Hollywood star. He's a man with a history, a pattern that's been repeated so many times it's almost become predictable. And that pattern? It's the reason people are starting to wonder if history is about to repeat itself one more time. Let's go back to where it all started to fall apart before, because if you don't understand Jason's romantic history, you can't possibly understand why what's happening now is so significant. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Jason was dating Kelly Brook, the British model and television presenter who was already famous when Jason was still a nobody trying to make it in Hollywood. They were together during his breakthrough years when Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels put him on the map. Kelly supported him when he had nothing. She believed in him when Hollywood was still figuring out who this bald British guy with the Cockney accent was. And then something happened. Something that industry insiders have whispered about for years but nobody's ever really confirmed publicly. The official story is that they grew apart, that their careers were pulling them in different directions. But there were rumors, persistent rumors that started circulating around 2004, right before their breakup was announced. Tabloids at the time suggested there might have been someone else, that Jason's sudden rise to fame had introduced him to a lifestyle that didn't include the woman who'd stood by him when he was struggling. Then came the real gut punch. Kelly moved on to Billy Zane almost immediately after, and suddenly everyone was asking, was she the one who left, or was she replacing what she'd already lost? Jason never spoke about it publicly, never addressed the speculation, and his silence said everything. When a man refuses to defend himself against cheating rumors, you have to wonder what he's protecting. Fast forward to 2005. Jason, now 38 and officially a Hollywood action star, meets Sophie Monk, the gorgeous Australian pop singer who was everything Kelly wasn't. Wild, fun, spontaneous, young. She was 26. He was pushing 40. The age gap alone raised eyebrows, but nobody was prepared for how quickly that relationship would burn out. They lasted barely 18 months, and when it ended in late 2006, Sophie's friends started talking. Not immediately, but years later, in interviews that felt like therapy sessions disguised as casual conversations. In a 2011 interview with the Sydney Morning Herald, Sophie said something that should have been a massive red flag for anyone watching Jason's pattern. She called him the hardest man to love, not because he didn't care, but because he carried the world in silence. That sounds romantic on the surface, doesn't it? The strong, silent type. But read between the lines. What Sophie was really saying was that Jason was emotionally unavailable, that he couldn't let anyone in, that his walls were so high even someone as vibrant and loving as her couldn't scale them. And there were other whispers too, rumors that never quite made it to print but circulated in the Australian entertainment circles Sophie ran in. Talk about long absences, about phone calls that went unanswered, about a man so consumed by his career that there simply wasn't room for anyone else. Then came Alex Zosman. If Kelly was the loyal supporter and Sophie was the wild flame, Alex was supposed to be the calm, the peace Jason had been looking for. She was a London-based model and interior designer, someone who understood his world but wasn't consumed by fame. They met in 2007, and for nearly 3 years, people thought Jason had finally found his match. 3 serious relationships. 3 women who by all accounts loved him deeply. 3 breakups that happened right when Jason's career was demanding everything from him. Do you see it yet? Jason Statham doesn't cheat in the traditional sense, at least not that anyone's been able to prove. But he does something arguably worse. He makes his career his mistress. He chooses the adrenaline, the stunts, the next film, the next franchise over the women who try to build a life with him. And that brings us to Rosie. When Jason met Rosie Huntington-Whiteley in 2010, she was 23 and he was 43. A 20-year age gap. She was at the beach before their son Jack was born in 2017. And then 5 more years before their daughter Isabella arrived in 2022. By all appearances, Jason had finally broken his pattern. He'd found the one woman who could handle his lifestyle, who understood that his body was his business and that business demanded constant attention. But here's what nobody was paying attention to. They never got married. Engaged in 2016, and here we are in 2025, 9 years later, still engaged. In Hollywood, when a couple stays engaged for nearly a decade, it's not because they're taking their time. It's because someone, usually the man, doesn't want to make it legal. And before you say it's just a piece of paper, let me remind you that Rosie comes from a world where image is everything, where marriage means security, where a wedding ring is the ultimate statement of commitment. She's a supermodel who's built her brand on elegance, sophistication, and traditional beauty. Does it really make sense that she wouldn't want the fairy tale wedding? Or is it possible that Jason, the man who spent his entire adult life running from commitment, still has one foot out the door? Now let's talk about what's happening right now, because this is where things get really interesting. In the last 6 months, there's been a noticeable shift in how Jason and Rosie present themselves publicly. If you go back and look at their social media from 2020 through 2023, you'll see a relatively consistent pattern. Family photos, couple shots, Rosie posting about Jason's movies, Jason occasionally appearing in Rosie's stories. Nothing excessive, but enough to signal that yes, they're together, they're happy, they're a unit. But starting around mid-2024, something changed. Rosie's posts about Jason became less frequent. When she did post about him, the captions got shorter, less personal. The heart emojis disappeared. And Jason, who was never big on social media to begin with, went almost completely dark on any content featuring Rosie. You might say that's just them valuing privacy, but here's the thing. In Hollywood, when couples start pulling back from public displays of affection, it's usually for one of 2 reasons. Either they're trying to protect a relationship that's in trouble, or they're preparing the public for an eventual split so it doesn't come as a shock. Then there's the matter of their living situation. Multiple sources, and yes, I'm talking about people who work in the industry, people who've been on sets with Jason, people who've worked events with Rosie, have noticed that they're spending more time apart than ever. Jason's been filming extensively, which isn't unusual for him, but what is unusual is that Rosie hasn't been visiting sets the way she used to. Remember those candid paparazzi photos from a few years ago of Rosie and the kids visiting Jason on location? When's the last time you saw one of those? 2023? 2022? Exactly. And it gets more interesting. In March of 2024, Jason was spotted at a restaurant in Los Angeles with his Expendables co-stars, and according to people who were there, he was without his wedding ring. Now, he's never been one to wear jewelry constantly, but this wasn't just any dinner. This was a public appearance at a high-profile restaurant where photographers are always lurking. A man who's happily engaged doesn't go to a place like that without his ring unless he's sending a message, consciously or not. Then there's the Rosie side of things. In April 2024, she did an interview with British Vogue, and while most of it focused on her beauty line and her career, there was one question about balancing motherhood and her relationship. Her answer was fascinating. She talked extensively about motherhood, about her kids, about her career, but when the interviewer specifically asked about Jason, about how they make it work, Rosie gave the shortest, most generic answer of the entire interview. We support each other's careers and make it work. That's it. No stories about their private moments, no anecdotes about Jason being a great father, nothing personal whatsoever. For someone who's usually so articulate and thoughtful in interviews, that non-answer spoke volumes. But here's where the speculation really starts to build into something that could be the truth nobody wants to say out loud. There are rumors, and these are coming from people who work in Jason's inner circle, that he's been struggling with the reality of domestic life in ways he never anticipated. Remember, Jason is 58 years old now. He spent 43 years as a bachelor, doing whatever he wanted, traveling the world, taking risks, living on adrenaline. Then suddenly he's got 2 young kids, a partner who wants stability, and a body that's starting to remind him every single day that he can't do this forever. According to one source who worked on a recent production with Jason, he's been increasingly nostalgic about his younger days, constantly telling stories about his 20s and 30s, about the freedom he had before settling down. Now, that could just be an older guy reminiscing, or it could be a man who's realizing he traded one life for another and isn't sure he made the right choice. And there's another layer to this that nobody's talking about, but it might be the most significant factor of all. Jason's career is at a crossroads. He's too old to be the leading action star in the way he was a decade ago, but he's too identified with action to transition into dramatic roles the way some actors do. He's watching younger guys like John Boyega and Michael B. Jordan take the roles he would have gotten 10 years ago. His last few films, while successful, haven't had the cultural impact his earlier work did. And for a man whose entire identity is built on being the toughest guy in the room, that loss of relevance has got to sting. So here's the scenario that insiders are quietly suggesting might be playing out. Jason is facing a midlife crisis of epic proportions. He's watching his career slowly decline. He's trapped in a domestic situation that, while beautiful on the surface, doesn't give him the rush that jumping out of helicopters does. He's got a partner who's 20 years younger, who's at the peak of her career, who's got decades of opportunities ahead of her. And he's starting to wonder if he made a mistake, if he gave up too much, if there's one more adventure left in him before his body completely gives out. Now, does that mean he's cheating? No credible source has suggested that. But what multiple people have suggested is that emotionally, mentally, Jason might already be checked out. He's there physically, he's providing for his family, he's playing the role of committed partner, but his heart, his real passion, is elsewhere. It's in the gym, on the film sets, in the cars, in the world where he's still Jason Statham, the action legend, not Jason Statham, the tired father of two who has to leave premieres early to relieve the nanny. And here's the really heartbreaking part that makes this whole situation feel inevitable. Rosie knows. How could she not? She's been with him for 15 years. She watched what happened with Kelly, Sophie, and Alex. She knew the pattern when she got into this. And maybe she thought she'd be different, that her youth, her beauty, her understanding of his world would be enough to break the cycle. But patterns exist for a reason. They're not just habits. They're who we are at our core. And Jason Statham, for all his strength and discipline and fame, is at his core a man who's never been able to put another human being before his own ambitions. So what happens next? If the rumors are true, if the distance between them keeps growing, if Jason's midlife crisis continues to pull him away from domestic life, we might be looking at an announcement sometime in 2025 or 2026. It won't be dramatic. There won't be accusations or tabloid wars. It'll be a quiet, mutual statement about how they'll always love each other, how they're committed to co-parenting, how they're just at different places in their lives. All the usual Hollywood breakup language that translates to, "We tried, but he couldn't stop being who he's always been." And the saddest part? Rosie will be fine. She's young, beautiful, successful, and will have no shortage of options. Jason, on the other hand, will be 58, maybe 59 by then, watching another relationship end the same way all the others did, finally forced to confront the reality that his greatest weakness isn't his aging body or his declining career. It's his inability to let anyone matter more than the next stunt, the next role, the next rush of adrenaline that makes him feel alive. That's the tragedy nobody's talking about. Not that Jason Statham might lose another relationship, but that he's been losing them all along because he never learned how to win at love the way he wanted everything else. Through commitment, sacrifice, and the courage to be vulnerable. In the end, the man who could survive a truck plunging into the Black Sea might not survive the one battle he never trained for. The battle to choose love over legacy. And if these rumors are true, if this relationship is really as fragile as people are whispering, then but by 2010 that relationship had quietly dissolved, too. No drama, no public statements, just another woman who'd loved Jason Statham and discovered that love wasn't enough to compete with the relentless machine of his ambition. Here's where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore.